Hey, what's up guys? My name is Trivudu, and today we are going to go over all the things that you should know to give you every advantage possible when fighting the Object 279. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this is going to make it easy, but these things will definitely help you. Before we get into the video, I would like to remind you guys that I stream almost every night on Twitch. I would love to see you there. Usually we start at about 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And for anyone who's looking to support the YouTube channel, we did just release some t-shirts. So I will have a link down below in the description so you can go and check out some cool shirts that we made. So let's go ahead and get into the video. And hopefully by the end of this, you won't feel like throwing yourself off a cliff the next time you have to fight an Object 279. So from a balance standpoint, the Object 279 doesn't really make sense because it can be sitting in the middle of the open. It doesn't really have a frontal weak spot. It has the cupola weak spots where you have a high chance to pin on the cupolas. But other than that, it can sit in the middle of the open, and this is kind of what it looks like. The only real determining factor for increasing your chance to pin this thing is the angle that it sits at. So if it's starting to slant downhill, you get a greater chance to pin the front. And if it's pointed uphill, you have a worse chance to pin the front. So there's two main principles that you need to follow when you fight this thing. The first is that if you don't have high penetration, or if you're a lower tier tank, even if you're shooting premium and you just have bad penetration, you need to go for the cupola. If you do have high penetration and you're shooting premium, you have an increased chance to pin, but you still need to look out for the elevation of the tank. Depending on the elevation, you're still going to want to shoot at the cupola if he's in a good position. I'll show that in the video. Otherwise, if you are shooting the front with premium, you still have a chance to bounce, and the front is kind of like a kaleidoscope. So it's never a guaranteed thing, but you generally want to shoot kind of in this lower middle section if you do have high penetration rounds. All right, so first scenario here. And this is interesting because the Object 279 is in an elevated position, which generally would give it a better advantage. But if you notice, he's slanted downhill just a little bit. So I'm shooting at him with a T10, which has very high heat penetration. And so I'm able to pin his front half of the time. I pin 2 out of 4 shots shooting his frontal armor. In this kind of situation, in the future, I would go for the cupola because I'm only hitting this 50% of the time. So he's above me, but he's slanted down, and it's still not quite worth it. It kind of is the same as being on flat ground. But the cupola would be a much better chance to pin here. All right, so now we're in a similar situation. We're in a Super Conqueror, which has less penetration for the premium ammo. He is above me, and he's also sloped back. So the front armor on this thing becomes really strong. If I'm shooting premium ammo, my chance to pin his front might be like a 1 out of 4, I would think, at this angle. So I'm going for cupolas. And an interesting thing on the cupolas you'll notice is, well, that was weird. I bounce the left cupola, I miss it, and then I bounce it. But the right one, I pin it. In my opinion, the right cupola is where you should shoot at this tank as much as possible. It goes in very well right here. This is just a random scenario we threw in. Sometimes a 279 might charge you and he's cresting a hill. Very rare situation. But if this happens, you need to shoot it between the tracks. Less chance of bouncing, especially if you're shooting heat. If you're shooting heat, you can absorb the shell into the tracks. So right into the middle, between the 2 middle tracks, if possible, would be where to shoot. Although this does not happen very often, clearly. So right here, we're coming up on one of my favorite teaching moments in this video, I think, is a lot of times when you get into fights with the 279, they'll do this rocking thing, kind of like people do in the 268 version 4. And what you want to do when they're rocking is, because you know how we're in this video, we're talking a lot about if they're slanted, a certain way, uphill, you shouldn't shoot. If they're slanted downhill, you should shoot. Right here, you want to try to time your shots so that you shoot right at the bottom of them dipping down. And then it gives you a slightly better chance to pin the whole armor. So it can be a little bit challenging to hit it, but I think this would be a good option. And a lot of people do tend to rock in this tank because they think it makes it harder to pin, but they're actually giving you a better chance to pin on the down slope. So if you're fighting a 279 and he's on a corner, a good player in a 279 will lead with the front. So what they're going to try to do is get you to shoot the outside edge of their tank. And what you need to do is wait for them to pass that center line, and then you'll have a better chance to pin with just the way the angling of the armor works out. And here he's bouncing. So if I shoot on the down and in the center line or more to the right, I have a better chance to pin here. Especially because he's hiding his good cupola as well. This would be my best option. And that actually pinned pretty far outside to the left. I'm not quite sure how. It just must have been a high roll for the penetration. And right here, this is the reason people hate this tank. This is arguably the best case scenario for playing your 279E effectively. He's in the middle of the open, but he's on a downslope. So his front end's pointing way up in the air. I really have no chance to pin the front of his tank anywhere. So my only option in a situation like this is to shoot for the cupola. And as I recommend, I would go for the right cupola if possible. And he's just presenting the hardest case scenario here. He's wiggling, he's bouncing back and forth. He is pointing straight at me, which gives me an advantage to hit his cupola, because if he angled and tried to move left and right, then I could pin him on the side of the armor. But here he has to go backwards and forwards, and I can hit this cupola pretty well. That was just bad aim. I'm trying to time it with his rocking. It's not always going to be easy, but that would be the best case scenario for you. Although definitely try to avoid fighting one of these things if they're playing it in a spot like that, if you can help it. And this example is really interesting to me because I told him to do a bad side scrape. So I said a good player would lead with the nose, and someone who's less experienced in the 279 will tend to side scrape. So I was just going to have him side scrape and show you guys like, hey, watch, I can pin this really easy. And I was like, why are these bouncing? Okay, so 2 pinned, but I actually ended up bouncing a lot from what I remember in the video. I think the reason I bounced so many is because he's sloped downhill, or like his back end is down, his front end is up, and that is increasing his armor just a little bit on the front, and it's hard to pin. I was like, this is supposed to be an example of how it's easy to pin. So that's definitely something that you always have to keep in mind when you fight this tank. How is their tank sloped? And right here, he's driving uphill just enough to make that hard to pin. Now he's on a little bit more of flat ground. I think I still bounce this, yeah. 279 armor. So worst case scenario, you're in a medium tank, you're out of cover, you get pushed by one of these things. You should definitely try to side hug him. You can try to circle if you want, but the 279 is pretty fast. He'll probably catch you if you try that. So you have a better chance if you're in a medium tank and you have a decent turret to just side hug him and try to stay low and make him miss your cupola. And I'm playing versus Pomegranate here. He's a good player. He's hitting my turret roof. But this is giving me a little bit of a chance. And he doesn't have enough gun depression over the side to shoot my side armor. It's a little bit of a weakness on this tank, worth pointing out. And at the end of the day, it's just important to remember that when you're fighting versus any tank in the game, it doesn't matter what tank it is, if they have a positional advantage on you, you should bail. You should try to predict these things before they happen, if you will. For example, when I was fighting the 279 on the ramp on mines, I should probably avoid that situation before I get into it, because that's really not in my favor. And just like here, I'm fighting an SCB. He's got the high ground. Like, yeah, I can pin him sometimes, but his chance to pin me is much better. And that's a scenario where you should bail. What's the saying? Sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. I think this applies to fighting any tank, and something always to consider when fighting the 279. But I still wanted to make this video and just kind of show you guys some different scenarios, what you should look for. Highly recommend shooting the top right cupola. And if you can pin the whole armor because you have great penetration, just look for the angling of the tank. Anyways, guys, I hope this helps you. And thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Oh, I forgot. Oh, 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 oh. I didn't know you could do this. Hello.